The evidence here made clear that President Trump was, by a large measure, the most culpable and most responsible person in this conspiracy. These crimes were committed for his benefit. The attack that happened at the Capitol, as part of this case, does not happen without him.
What happens when a political party is forced to choose between the facts of an insurrection and the man who incited it? Tonight, we look at the documented evidence of what happened inside the Oval Office while the Capitol was under siege, and the unimaginable public humiliation of the leaders who now look the other way. 5 years ago, the landscape of American politics shifted in a way that most people never thought possible. We are talking about a moment that redefined the boundaries of political loyalty and the concept of personal accountability. For a long time, we have looked at the events of January 6th as a single day of chaos. But as the legal process moves forward and as more voices come forward to speak the truth, we are seeing a much larger story. This is a story about what happens when public leaders are faced with a level of humiliation that was previously unimaginable. It is a story about the distance between what these leaders said when the glass was still breaking and what they say now that they are seeking political power. To understand where we are today, we have to go back to the most serious developments identified by those who investigated the attack on our democracy. We have to look at the findings of the former Special Prosecutor Jack Smith. When Jack Smith spoke to the Republican-run House Judiciary Committee, he did not offer opinions or guesses. He offered an explanation of a legal indictment. He explained why he believed the evidence against Donald Trump included proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The central finding was not just about a rally or a speech. The evidence made clear that Donald Trump was, by a very large measure, the most culpable person in a conspiracy. He was the person most responsible for what happened. This wasn't a conspiracy for the good of the country. According to the evidence presented by the special prosecutor, these crimes were committed for one person's benefit. They were committed for the benefit of Donald Trump. The attack that happened at the Capitol did not just happen by accident. It did not happen in a vacuum. The special prosecutor's view of the evidence was that the attack does not happen without Donald Trump. He caused it. He exploited it. And perhaps most significantly, the evidence suggests that the violence was foreseeable to him. Think about that for a moment. Think about the weight of that finding. We are talking about a sitting president of the United States who, according to a special prosecutor, saw the violence coming and used it to his advantage. And once that attack on the Capitol actually began, the evidence shows he refused to stop it. Instead of calling for peace, instead of calling for the National Guard, he issued a tweet. It was a tweet that, in the mind of the special prosecutor, endangered the life of his own vice president.
He instead issued a tweet that, without question in my mind, endangered the life of his own vice president. When the violence was going on, he had to be pushed repeatedly by his staff members to do anything to quell it.
This is the urgent reality of the situation. While the violence was going on, the president had to be pushed. He had to be pushed repeatedly by his own staff members to do anything at all to quell the riot. This is not a matter of political debate. This is what the investigators found. There is no historical analog for this. There is no other moment in American history where a president behaved this way. As the indictment points out, Donald Trump was free to say he thought he won the election. He was even free to say it falsely. He was free to lie about the results, but he was not free to violate federal law. He was not free to use knowingly false statements about election fraud to target a lawful government function. That is the line that was crossed. That is what differentiates this case from any past history in our country. And yet, in the face of these facts, we see a political party managing a level of humiliation that is hard to wrap your head around. We see leaders like Marco Rubio, Lindsey Graham, and Nancy Mace. These are people who, at one point, seemed to understand exactly what had happened. They seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, but now they have made a different choice. They have chosen to support the man they once condemned. Take Congressman Nancy Mace, for example. Right after Donald Trump incited the attack on the Capitol, her words were clear. She said he needed to be held accountable. She said he needed to be in a position where he could never run for office again. She stated plainly that the violence was incited by the rhetoric. And she didn't stop there. She condemned her own party. She condemned members of the Republican Party for helping to incite the attack. She talked about how she and other members of Congress risked their lives for what was supposed to be a ceremonial vote. But then something changed. In what has been described as a full public humiliation, Nancy Mace became a faithful Donald Trump supporter again. She is not alone. Marco Rubio also thought he was finished with Donald Trump 5 years ago. He had watched police officers get attacked. He had seen the men and women who guard the doors every day getting spit on and assaulted. But that concern seemed to disappear very quickly. He returned to what has been described as the worship of Donald Trump. Why would someone do that? Why would someone like Marco Rubio flip-flop so completely? In his case, the sources suggest it might be about a lifelong dream. Rubio has wanted regime change in Cuba his entire life. To achieve that, he needs to be in a position of power, like Secretary of State. And to get that power, he has to manage the humiliation of supporting the man he once attacked back in 2016. The sources suggest that for people like Rubio, Venezuela is just a rehearsal. The real goal is Cuba. They don't really care about Venezuela. They care that Venezuela supplies oil to Cuba. Donald Trump might talk about the oil to distract people, but those in the know understand the real motivation.
They are serious about Cuba. They do not care about Venezuela. They have never cared about Venezuela. The only thing they have cared about is that Venezuela helps Cuba by supplying oil to Cuba. Cuba is the dream. Venezuela is the rehearsal. They aren't going to go after the oil. That is Trump just distracting people, and maybe Trump even believing it, but everyone knows that isn't really possible. Marco Rubio has had to do a lot of flip-flops to become a Trump supporter after being a Trump attacker.
This brings us to the core of the political crisis. We have a mountain of evidence regarding a conspiracy to overthrow an election, and we have a group of political leaders who are willing to ignore that evidence for the sake of their own careers. They have to live with the public knowledge of their own flip-flops. They have to manage a level of humiliation that is previously unimaginable. This includes people like J.D. Vance and hundreds of other elected Republicans in Washington. To see the true cost of this, we have to look away from the politicians and toward the people who were actually there. Today, House Democrats held a hearing to set the record straight on the Capitol insurrection. They heard from people who were part of the mob, people like Pamela Hempel. Her story is a powerful contrast to the stories of the politicians in Washington. Pamela Hempel was convicted of crimes for her part in the attack, but she is not claiming to be a victim of a weaponized Department of Justice. She says she pleaded guilty because she did the crime. She says she received due process. Most importantly, when Donald Trump offered pardons, she rejected it. Why would she reject a pardon? Because she says that accepting it would be lying about what happened on January 6th. She says, I am guilty and I own that guilt.
When Donald Trump pardoned us, I rejected the pardon. Accepting that pardon would be lying about what happened on January the 6th. I am guilty, and I own that guilt.
Her story is a step-by-step account of how the rhetoric from the top translated into action on the ground. She went to the speech. She heard Donald Trump say he would go to the Capitol with them. She heard people saying he was going to walk down there, so she went. But as we know, Donald Trump never showed up. The rioters did, and the attack began. Pamela Hempel was actually trampled by the other rioters. She says that if it weren't for the Capitol Police helping her that day, she might have died. She addressed the officers directly during the hearing. She apologized from the bottom of her heart for being part of the mob that put them in danger. She expressed gratitude to the officers who protected everyone, even people like her.
To the Capitol Police officers sitting, if I may address you for a minute. I am truly sorry from the bottom of my heart for being part of the mob that put you and so many officers in danger. I want the Capitol Police to know how truly grateful I am to them.
And this is where the two stories, the story of the politicians and the story of the rioters, come together. Pamela Hempel says she cannot believe that people are still disrespecting the police and lying about January 6th. She has committed herself to stopping the lies about the officers who protected the Capitol, but telling the truth has come at a great personal cost. She has been doxxed online, she has been harassed and even physically assaulted. But she says she doesn't care. She says she won't let it stop her. She says she cannot sit there while Donald Trump and others are lying. Her message is urgent. She says we must stop the lies being pushed by public leaders and by Trump himself. This brings us back to the findings of the House Select Committee and the words of Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney served as the vice chair of that committee. She described Donald Trump's conduct on that day as among the most shameful of the committee's findings. She described a president of the United States sitting in the dining room off the Oval Office. He wasn't in the Situation Room. He wasn't on the phone with the Department of Defense. He was watching the violent riot on television.
Among the most shameful of this committee's findings was that President Trump sat in the dining room off the Oval Office watching the violent riot at the Capitol on television. For hours, he would not issue a public statement instructing his supporters to disperse and leave the Capitol, despite urgent pleas from his White House staff and dozens of others to do so. Members of his family, his White House lawyers, virtually all those around him knew that this simple act was critical. For hours, he would not do it.
For hours, he sat there. For hours, he would not issue a public statement telling his supporters to leave the Capitol. He did this despite urgent pleas from his own family. He did this despite pleas from his White House lawyers and his staff. Virtually everyone around him knew that a simple statement from the president was critical to stopping the violence, but for hours he would not do it. During those hours of silence, law enforcement agents were being attacked. They were being seriously injured. The Capitol was invaded. The democratic process, the electoral count, was halted. The lives of everyone in that building were put at risk. Liz Cheney called this an utter moral failure. She called it a clear dereliction of duty. And the special prosecutor's indictment calls it a crime. So we have to ask ourselves, how do we reconcile these facts with the current political environment? We have the testimony of the people who were there, like Pamela Hempel, who are choosing truth over pardons. We have the legal findings of Jack Smith, who points to Donald Trump as the most culpable person in a conspiracy to target a government function. And then we have the Republican leaders in Washington who are managing their own public humiliation by returning to his side. The sources show us a clear pattern. The rhetoric posted online and on social media led directly to the violence. The lack of action from the Oval Office allowed that violence to continue for hours. And the current narrative being pushed by some public leaders is being directly contradicted by the people who actually participated in the riot. This is not a matter of different opinions on policy. This is about the documented history of an attack on the foundations of the American government. It is about a president who, according to the evidence, caused and exploited a violent situation for his own benefit. It is about the staff who begged him to stop it, and the vice president whose life was endangered by his tweets. When we look at the actions of people like Nancy Mace or Marco Rubio, we are seeing the human side of a political calculation. We are seeing people who condemn the violence and the incitement when it happened, but who have now decided that their political future depends on supporting the person responsible. They are choosing to manage the humiliation of their past statements in order to maintain their current standing. But as Pamela Hempel pointed out, the lies have consequences. They lead to harassment, they lead to the disrespect of law enforcement, and they obscure the reality of what happened during those hours when the president sat in his dining room and watched the Capitol burn on TV. The evidence is there. It is in the indictments. It is in the committee reports. It is in the testimony of the rioters themselves. The special prosecutor made it clear that this case is different from any other in our history. It is different because it involves the use of knowingly false statements to target a lawful government function. It is different because it involves a level of culpability that rests primarily with one person. As we move forward, the question isn't just about what happened on January 6th. It is about what happens now. It is about whether the unimaginable humiliation of political leaders will continue to take precedence over the documented facts of the case. It is about whether the voices of those like Pamela Hempel, who are trying to stop the lies, will be heard over the rhetoric of those seeking power. The narrative is long and the details are complex, but the core of the story is simple. It is a story of a conspiracy, a dereliction of duty, and a political party trying to navigate the aftermath of a day that changed everything. We have the words of the investigators, we have the words of the witnesses, and we have the silence of the president in the dining room. Think of it this way. If a building is on fire and the person with the only key to the fire hydrant sits across the street watching it burn on television, we don't just ask why the fire started. We ask why they didn't turn on the water, and we ask why their friends are now standing in the ashes telling us there was never any fire at all. This is the state of the conversation. It is a conversation based on documents, on testimony, and on the legal reality of an indictment that has no historical analog. It is a story that continues to unfold every day in courtrooms and in congressional hearings. And it is a story that requires us to look past the political theater and focus on the documented facts of what was done and what was not done when the country needed its leaders the most. The facts show that the rhetoric mattered. The facts show that the silence mattered. And the facts show that the choices made by leaders in the aftermath continue to shape the future of the country. Whether it is Marco Rubio's dreams for Cuba or Nancy Mace's condemnation of her own party, the history of this moment is being written by the people who were there and the evidence they left behind. As Jack Smith told the committee, the evidence is clear, the culpability is clear, and the historical significance of these events is something that cannot be ignored, no matter how much some might wish to manage the humiliation of their own involvement. The record is being set straight, one testimony at a time, and the truth of January 6th remains a central pillar of the American political story. We will continue to follow these developments as the legal cases proceed and as more people come forward to speak about what they saw and what they did. Because in the end, the facts are the only thing that can cut through the noise of the political moment. They are the only thing that can provide a clear view of where we have been and where we are going as a nation. The testimony of Pamela Hempel reminds us that owning the guilt is the first step toward the truth. The findings of Liz Cheney remind us of the moral failures at the highest levels of power. And the indictment from Jack Smith reminds us that in the United States, targeting a lawful government function through a conspiracy is a crime that must be addressed. Tonight, we have looked at the evidence, we have looked at the narrative of that day and the years that followed, and we have seen the cost of political loyalty in the face of an unimaginable reality. The story of January 6th is not over. It is still being told, and the documents and testimonies are the map that will lead us to the final chapter. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the facts and the narrative of one of the most significant moments in our history. We will be here to bring you the updates as they happen, staying focused on the documented evidence and the consequences of the actions taken by those in power. Good night.